How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today, we are going to discuss being professional when dealing with unprofessional acts. And we'll kind of break down the acts as we tell our stories. But basically, having to remain professional in an environment that just may not want you to be professional. It's going to be a very interesting show, but topic like this, guys, that's going to save your career. Trust and believe this, because trust and believe, everybody's watching the moment that you act unprofessional. Everything's a test. Now, of course, we have our normal guest of experts. We're going to have Greg Piper, Russ Hamilton, and Connie Eileen. Greg, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Not at all. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Tier Talk. My name is Greg Piper. I'm the Director of Training for Guardian RFID. Prior to my 3.5 years with Guardian, I spent 3 years with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as a deputy sheriff assigned to the Corrections Division. And before that, I spent 9.5 years with the Kansas Department of Corrections in various capacities. Started out as an officer walking the tiers, worked my way up through the administration ranks, and ended in staff development. In my current role, I visited 200 plus jails across the country, traveling like I am now to places all across this country, visiting with correctional staff, giving them tips, tools, tricks, and giving them encouragement to continue to do their job as professionally as possible.
Well, obviously, Greg, thanks for what you do. I know you definitely have a lot of sacrifices, man. You're out there traveling, your family's at home, so what you're doing definitely deserves our gratitude. So thank you. And also thank you for Guardian RFID for help sharing the message and making sure our brave men and women are recognized in corrections. So you're just part of a great business. And again, I really appreciate what you do. Connie Eileen, a good friend of mine, definitely a trainer that's needed in this profession, who I believe is doing well. Before we go into the topic, I would love to hear how good the business is going. Connie understood that there was a gap when it came to training civilian staff, and Connie has done what she could to make sure that information gets out there, ultimately makes the facilities safer and more secured. But Connie, you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, my name is Connie Eileen. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. We really focus on making sure civilians are prepared for the realities of the correctional environment. Prior to starting the academy, I did 10 years at Rikers Island as a prison health services manager, and then 5 years for the Connecticut Department of Corrections as a prison health services administrator. And now I am enjoying my time with students at Monroe College. I have 26 seniors this semester, so we're having tons of fun.
Hey, Connie, how's school going for you right now? Are you teaching, I guess, through unified communication like Zoom?
Yeah, so we're teaching on Blackboard. We have joint these sessions that you can join online through the school platform. So it's going good. I mean, of course, the kids are nervous coming out possibly into a job market where they're not sure they'll be able to get jobs.
Yeah, it's unknown times. But I will tell you something, though. If you need guest speakers, the Zoom right here, you got the Tier Talk.
Absolutely.
Tier Talk crew. And by the way, Connie, thanks for everything you do. You're just amazing. And I'm glad that the business is going well for you, because I know for you, it's not about personal success. It's about getting that message out there. And hopefully the people that eventually come join you on this mission are just as passionate as you are. But if not, you'll weed them out. I know you.
Yep.
You'll weed them out. And there's that
Yep.
smile. Hey, Russ, Mr. Russ from San Quentin. Russ, first off, guess what? Me and Russ have started a podcast, the Tier Talk podcast. We've actually done 3 episodes. They air every Friday. So we've done an intro. Tomorrow, which is May 15th, you'll see one about dorms, which actually features Greg Piper. And we also have Keith Helwig. And then next Friday, the 22nd, great episode about the first day on the job. And you'll see Josh Mills and Kevin Miller, just really good topics. And I know Russ has to be excited to we're having fun with these podcasts.
Yeah, it's a different venue. I know that, one great thing is I don't have to worry about combing my hair or putting a hat on or getting out of my jammies. So since there's no video to it, but yeah, it's been a real great thing to try out. I think we're going to have some really some really great and fantastic shows. I think the one we did yesterday, which will be posting, I think you said March 22nd, on stuff that happened to us on the first day. That's going to be a great one. And if this is your first time catching us, though, on this part of Tier Talk, my name's Russ Hamilton. I have 27 years, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started at San Quentin way back in 1989. Eventually transferred to Sierra Prison, then went on to promote, and then I retired, and then I went back for a juvenile detention lockup in Northern California. And anyway, I'm just glad to be able to be here and do another show, because I think this is going to be a real good one. I have a real positive feeling about this one.
And I believe Russ meant May 22nd. I think he said March 22nd.
Did I say March? It's all M's to me.
Hey, Russ, obviously, thanks for just, doing what you do. I mean, the information that you provide on countless of videos that we've done together, and now being able to take that to the audio side of things, I just think there's so much value in what you're providing. And, it's there for people to find it. If they find it, great job. There's some good information for you. And if you don't, it's a loss. It really is a loss. But hopefully the traffic from YouTube will build the traffic on the podcast. And then eventually the podcast may build the traffic back onto the YouTube channel, because it could be found on many avenues, Spotify. But the key here is the Law Enforcement Today, which means that we're finally being elevated to, just an equal floor with other law enforcement agencies. And the cool thing about us is when I talk about corrections is a big world. So it's not just about custody sometimes. Sometimes it's about the programming side of things, the management side of things. Just so many avenues you can take that has literally led me to over almost 700 videos on my YouTube channel. So, corrections is no small world. All right, guys, when we come back from our sponsor, we're going to be discussing being professional at the workplace, especially when the world is telling you you shouldn't be professional. Basically, don't react in a bad way. The world is watching. Now, guys, if you're happy the show Tier Talks to you, brave men and women at work in corrections, so please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We'll go to our sponsor, and when we come back, we are going to talk about being professional in an unprofessional world, and then we're going to close off with Connie's signature goodbye. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. All right, guys, and we are back. A little fight in between the break. Don't worry, guys, you're not going to see that. Connie's, of course, on this thing where she's not going to say goodbye, and obviously she will give it a try because she's a fighter, and she's going to do it every day. And I think Greg said it once in a show. Doesn't matter how many times you fall down, right? Connie, you just keep getting up. But you also, on the adverse, you do fall hard. You know what I mean? But it's all fun. Hey, so, I thought this was a good topic because what I think people don't realize is that sometimes they don't realize the actions of management when it comes to trying to handle a situation that, let's say, could be a staff assault. And sometimes what people think is that when management reacts to, it could be seen like they're protecting the inmate. What they may not realize is they're actually protecting staff and also protecting the facility or the agency from what could be a potential lawsuit. So I figure some of the actions we'll be recovering, obviously right now, would be attacks on staff, whether it's a physical attack or even just a splash of some bodily fluid, or just inmates that are verbally abusive or just know how to push your buttons, just basically just doing what they can to rile you up, and how you have to have a thick skin, beyond thick skin, to handle that. So I thought we could do at first is share some stories. Now, I'm going to go to Russ first, because before the show started, Russ was getting ready to share a story with me that may be a bit controversial from the way Russ was saying it. And then what I mean by controversial is how we're going to take it in. But here's the cool thing about what Tier Talk's about. Tier Talk is about listening to that controversy and then trying to find where that middle road is. So I'm going to go ahead and, Russ, I'm really curious about hearing your story.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Yeah, I was reticent to share this story, not just because I was in the wrong on this particular circumstance, but because I don't want someone taking the lesson away from this, thinking that, hey, that's a good idea. If that ever happens to me, I'm going to do that too. This is something you should definitely not do. This is something you should definitely avoid if you're placed in the kind of circumstance that I was placed in. It wasn't all my fault. As you're going to see, the supervisor was partially at fault because of the way he handled the situation. Moreover, I think that as we get into some of these situations, we really need to start holding some of our elected officials, that not just elected officials, but legislatures and everything else, that aren't giving us good protections within the canon of law to deal with these kind of situations. But I'm going to go ahead and delve right into this. And this is what happened to me. I was a fairly new officer, and I was running a tier. I probably had maybe 2 years in or something like that. And anyway, one of the things about going up and down this particular tier and having to serve dinner and stuff on the tier itself, because it was a lockdown unit, was that inmates, as they are prone to do, they will fish. And if you guys don't know what fishing is, they take lines and they zip them up and down that tier, and they move things from one cell to the other. Well, there's not a lot you can do about that, because you can't get into those cells. You can't do anything about it. But if they do it in your presence and it's happening while you're on the tier, you grab the line, you break it, you do away with their fishing line. And this was pretty common, but this one particular inmate who was fishing in my presence on that day, I don't know if he had a bad day or whatever, but the line zipped by me, and I reached over and I stepped on top of it, and I broke it off with my boot, and he came completely enraged, and he stood up and he spit in my face. There's nothing I can do about it. I have no way to access that. The locks are locked. I've got a gunner right there. So you know what? I was pretty pissed off. I was pretty upset about that. Went and, cleaned up, did whatever, went downstairs, told my sergeant what happened. He says, well, I don't care. I'm going home early tonight. And he just walked out the door. And so I was like, I was now enraged more with my sergeant than I was with the inmate that spit on me. And so, I filled out my little, disciplinary report real quick, and I dropped it in the thing for the inmate typist to type it. And I went back up there, and the longer I sat there, the more enraged with my sergeant, with the inmate, with the whole world I became. I looked over, and sitting on my desk, there was a paper bag, and I reached over and I opened it up, and it was a typical inmate lunch, and inside of it was an apple. And so I grabbed the apple and I took a bite of it, and then I took another bite and another bite until I had the entire apple in my mouth, and I chewed it until it was the most pulpy liquid substance that I could manage to have happen. And I went down the tier, and the guy was fishing again, and I stepped on his line, and he stood up, and I let him have it with every bit of that apple. And anyway, needless to say, I ended up getting in trouble for that, mostly because by that time the disciplinary report had already gone through and been assigned a log number and stuff. And needless to say, me and this inmate, we had a lot of animus for each other. But anyway, thankfully, my lieutenant was able to make it go away. And this was definitely on me. I was wrong for doing it. I should have been more professional. I was a young officer at the time. But that went on to create an even worse situation down the line that really wasn't my fault. As things went on and time got better, for whatever reason, this inmate that I'd had the problem with, that ended up with the apple chunks all over him, he took a liking to me. And as I was going up and down my tier day to day, I was starting to have problems with one inmate that was a couple of cells down from his. And anyway, this inmate, every night he would shit on his tray and slide it out. And it was becoming a real problem. And so anyway, this inmate, the one that I'd thrown the apple chunks on, he took it upon himself to go ahead and have the guy beaten senseless on the yard, because this guy was a shot caller and stuff. Anyway, that turned into a whole other thing. And fortunately, you know, I wasn't involved with that, but one bad thing can lead to another. And, you know, this game, the kind of get backs that you're able to get from a legal perspective, and the kind of get backs that you're able to get from a perspective that are within policy and within procedure, there's a very narrow band there. And you start doing stupid things, and those stupid things can cost other people things. You know, if you're the kind of person that is involved in those kind of get backs like I took on that day, and then you expect other people to cover up for you, and it ends up coming out that they lied for you or tried to cover up, or maybe they decided they weren't going to lie. Maybe they decided that they were just going to tell the truth. And then what's going to happen then? You're going to start calling them a snitch. Other people are going to start calling them a snitch when it was your problem that went off. No, man, I took responsibility, albeit somewhat lately, for what I did. But I'm going to tell you right now, that was not the right way to handle it. There's a lot of self-control that you have to have within this particular business, within this particular profession. And, you know, you have to find a way to peel yourself back from that personal get back. Now, if you can find ways to get that guy charged, like if the legislatures would do their job, if the elected officials would do their job, more power to you. You know, later on, I had inmates that I charged with things like that ended up doing serious time, you know, over stuff like that. 1 3 years, I think 3 or 4 others for 1 year. You have to live within the boundaries of your profession. And when you step outside those boundaries, you can lose your job. So my advice is just don't go there. Find a way to get through on the professional side rather than the personal side.
You know, Russ, you kind of said something that was spot on. Rikers had a lot of problems because they felt that they didn't have the protection of, you know, government officials and whatnot. So a lot of the measures they took in their own hands because they felt they weren't backed by people that could protect them. You know, you have to have some level where inmates know not to do something. And if they feel that they're not backed by a higher level, then custody is going to like, well, then we have to do something, because if not, it just opens the door. But I want to ask you something before we go to Connie's story. Is there anything that the sergeant could have done to stop you from paying that back to the inmate?
You know, this sergeant had just had one of his staff members assaulted, right? So it's an assault and battery, and in the state of California, it's a felony. Okay, so I'll give that much to the legislature, right? So what should he have done? He should have, first of all, he should have made it sure I was okay. Second of all, he should have relieved me from that tier for the night. Okay. And he should have, you know, gone on and done the things that he was supposed to do. One of which is that in California, it's an automatic incident report. Okay. That incident report has to be forwarded to the security squad. The security squad has to take it and present it to the DA, and all kinds of things have to happen. I was left out there to just kind of, you know, fend for myself. I didn't know, you know, I hadn't been in that type of position before. So he was in a position right then that he could have stopped all that, right? He could have mitigated it. He could have done things. He could have had me switch with someone else, you know, and put on a different tier. But, you know, that was the way it went. I think Greg has something.
Yeah, I don't know. You said this was early on in your career, so I'm guessing this is the early 90s.
Yes.
Okay, so I know that in the early to mid 90s, and Connie can maybe chime in on this as well. Since the mid 90s, I know with the onset more and the more constant with Hep C, HIV, and things like that, I know bodily fluid attacks from spitting to any type of bodily fluid has become a higher level felony. And maybe back, you know, in the early 90s, it wasn't as strong a charge. But I will say that most facilities across the country have making any bodily fluid attack a higher level charge, because that's immediately the officer is to be relieved. They're able to go get a new uniform on, to shower, to decontaminate, regardless, because we don't know what level the offender has, what level of infections, things like that. So we have moved forward a little bit, but that may have been prior to that in California. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Connie, do you have any?
we got the gassing law passed in California, and I want to say 1985. So I already knew about it. At the time that this happened, I was well aware of what the gassing law was. I'd had, you know, classes and everything else on it. But this was just a matter, to me, in my opinion, I dropped the ball, but the supervisor of the unit, he really dropped the ball. I mean, he just let everything go. He just, you know, he just didn't care. He was getting his, you know, his special 4 hours of time because it was his birthday or whatever, and he just left.
Hey, Connie, you have any thoughts with Russ's story before we move on to the next one?
No, absolutely. I mean, at a bare minimum is that he should have been relieved, at least to just go decontaminate, because the whole bodily fluid situation is a big deal. And, you know, I know from state to state it varies what the protocol is, but I know in the places that I've worked, you immediately get relieved so you can go decontaminate, and you're usually not returned back to that unit for some time.
And you know what's funny? One of the steps from management, what I would definitely have to say it should start from that immediate floor supervisor, is to eliminate the potential for retaliation, which means that if you have a staff member that was just spit on, which is very hard to handle, you do want to get them relieved because you don't really want them to have any more interaction with that inmate. I'm looking at it from a management perspective, guys, but I want to be objective with that. I want you guys to know that there's many perspectives here, but I'm looking at the potential of where the lawsuit's going to be. The lawsuit's going to come not so much on what the inmate did to Russ, which is sad. It's going to probably come from what Russ does in instant reaction, which is why we need to go ahead and protect the inmate so we can then go ahead and protect Russ and the agency, if that makes any sense, which means that, again, if you have a staff assault, you know, the people that are involved in that initial staff assault are not going to be the people that are involved with the escort. And you're going to have a camera on the inmate. And the reason why we do that is because we want to eliminate the potential of that inmate being assaulted. And sometimes the camera, hopefully it regulates us. But with that said is when we have that feeling that, you know what, you did this to me and now I'm going to get you back, we have to jump on that as management and say, hey, Russ, take a breather, you know, go here, chill, do what you got to do. You know what I mean? You know, relax. And then if need be, that officer and that inmate should never see each other again. That inmate now should be shipped out to another facility and not by this facility where the assault happened. You would get another facility to drive the inmate, or maybe some central trans unit, But whatever it is, that inmate is going to be on camera all the way until they are dropped off at the other facility. And then we kind of we're good. Because the moment, here's the funny thing, I just want to tell you, just to add on this too, I don't want to forget this. When an inmate attacks a staff member, lawyers are going to be calling like crazy because they're going to be expecting retaliation. So they're going to jump in, hey, I know such and such did this, and, we know that your officers, must. If we don't do any of that, what's going to wind up happening here is this. That lawyer is going to wind up representing a losing case for free, because that's what's going to wind up happening in the long run. So we have to keep professional. But like Russ said, if you don't have confidence in the higher level, the people that pass the laws, then you're not going to have confidence in just sitting back and trust in the system to make sure that this inmate gets what's coming to them. But Russ, that was a great story. Thank you for sharing that. The level of vulnerability, the omission of, doing what you did, but there's so much to learn there, because I'm sure you're not the only one that ever felt like doing that or has done it. So thank you for sharing that.
It's really, I perfectly understand, why administration, really wants to look at, shielding themselves from liability in a case like that, minimizing their exposure to it. The feeling on the front line a lot of times is that they're really myopic in their vision. They really focus on that, and they don't focus on the part about prevention, which is, making sure that you get good charges filed, that you hold these guys accountable and do all of that stuff, rather than really trying, after the fact, oh, we got to do this. I'd rather have them, at least show me that they're focusing on the other aspects of it too, which, like I say, is prevention and discipline, filing charges, getting convictions, and all that.
Yeah, because I think that will put a lot of faith in a system where you're not going to have to feel the need to pay back, because the system's then going to take that role, and all you got to do is sit back and watch as this person gets more time in prison for the foolish acts, which should be enough to deter others from doing it. Because that's the key. The key here is this: if you get spit on or you get assaulted, and basically there is no consequence for those actions, it opens up the door for another inmate to do it. So we would prefer the consequences to be something legal. Get more time in prison. Got it? And it has to run consecutive, not concurrent. It can't be something that's already being absorbed. It has to be, once you're done with this 10 years, you're going to do another 5. These are the things that will actually protect us and also make us feel more confident. And the funny thing is, what people don't realize, it would also lead to facilities that aren't as aggressive towards each other, because most of the time is an inmate attacks you. Well, you know what? I don't trust the system to have my back. Therefore, I don't think the system's going to do anything to deter other inmates from doing it. So we're going to attack back. Then we're going to attack back. Then we're going to attack back. All you got to do is create good laws where if an inmate attacks you, you sit back and say the system's got this. So I'll just watch your world fall apart. And that's what ultimately, that's a system you want to work for. But Connie, you mentioned a story. Unfortunately, I wish we could have a thumbnail of it, because I think your story is going to have a lot of clicks. I'm being honest, Connie. I told you this when we were driving home. It's a great story, and I asked you at any point, were you able to take a picture of what happened? And you broke my heart when you said no. But I really want to hear this story, and I don't think Russ and Greg heard it yet.
Sure. So we had a tough case that came into the facility of someone who was supposed to be mentally ill. And we had a psychosocial assessment. We had all this stuff that kind of confirmed they were mentally ill, but not to the point that the person was presenting as. And so they were in our mental health unit. We were going through doing like an interdisciplinary team meeting, making sure, everyone in the unit had been assessed and seen by the psychiatrist. Whoever needed to have meds got their meds. And in this particular case, this offender was looking for psychotropic meds, but also looking for narcotics. And so our goal is to make sure that they're stable. not necessarily making sure that you have all the narcotics that you had up from outside. And so as we're in there talking, we're trying to make sure we get buy-in from the offender that they're actually going to be compliant with treatment. And when it got to the point when we started talking about narcotics and they weren't going to be getting their narcotics, it just got out of hand. All of a sudden, this inmate who was so decompensated was just now up and alert and really engaged in this conversation and building the case for why they should get their narcotic. And as we're talking, you know, I could see that my clinician was getting a little annoyed. So I just tried to like settle the situation, do some de-escalation, really try to reason with the offender and explain if we find over the period of time that this is something that you need, that we would provide it. And as like we're talking, all of a sudden the offender starts coughing. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, maybe someone should give him some water or something. And just out the blue, because I'm saying you cannot have your narcotics, the offender throws up all over me. Projectile throw up all over. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you are never getting a narcotic if it's up to me. But at the same token, I'm saying to myself, we've had this discussion. Here we are going back and forth. Are they really malingering? Are they not? And like, we're insisting that they are. But anyway, the situation happens. And you know, like there's those moments where you feel the heat rising and like, it's like the disrespect, it's just everything, right? You're like, here it is. I'm really trying to work with you. I'm trying to make sure you can get it at some point if you need it. And then you do this. And so then the people around me, of course, like my staff are looking like, holy crap, like what you going to do about this? And like, it was a lot to take in. I think specifically being a civilian and never having had that experience before, I was like, what is happening here? Like, and I think I was more surprised because it was happening to me, right? Because I'm a nice person. I try to work with everybody. I try to help everybody out. It didn't matter how nice I was being. It didn't matter that I was really trying to negotiate with this offender. Like, nothing mattered. All I think the offender could hear was that they weren't going to get that narcotic, and that was it. And so custody, of course, steps in, and it becomes like a whole big thing, which I, of course, remove myself at that point. But of course, then you start to go through this panic because you know what's going on in some of the bodily fluids that have now come across onto you. And the first instinct was, let me go get this medical record and see what's going on with this person, right? The other side of me says the HIPAA violation. So technically, I'm not providing treatment. I was a part of that conversation to make sure we gain compliance. But is it too much of a thin line for me to go grab that medical record and see what I could have been exposed to? And so my nursing supervisor was like, don't worry about it. I'm going to go make sure that you're okay. Because she knew I was struggling with, do I go check? I mean, I'm human. I want to make sure like I'm safe. I've got a baby at home. At the time, my daughter was much younger. And so I don't want to go home to her and I'm taking stuff home too, because now I've been exposed to somebody. But like, I remember feeling like if I wasn't in this cell, like I didn't know what I was thinking to do at the time, other than this is so disrespectful. I wanted to say some words. I know that I couldn't say anything out of my mouth that could somehow end me up in a situation. So I think the real thing here is, even when things happen that kind of throw you completely off like your game, like you've got to be able to reel yourself in and calm it down so that you don't do things that could jeopardize you or the institution.
You know, you mentioned something like you're keeping your calm, which is amazing. I don't know if I'd be able to. And I know Greg was kind of making sense. I don't know if Greg be able to. And I don't know if Russ be able to. But the funny thing is, I would also be concerned about how custody would react to the disrespect that was given you, because sometimes custody doesn't like when civilians get disrespected. And what's going to wind up happening is when custody sees that, they start to take measures in their own hands. So now you wind up having to kind of not even just check yourself, but you may have to check custody because they may have a good relationship with you. And all of a sudden, you know them, and you're like, wait, hold on, guys, hold on. Am I right?
Absolutely. So that's what happened. Essentially, like, one of the officers went and grabbed the offender. And I'm like, all right. Like, let's just take a step back. Meanwhile, I'm covered in throw up. And they're like, listen, Connie, just you go take care of that. We got this. And I'm like, okay.
Well, you know what's funny is when you're respected, you have to stop people from doing the dirty work because they'll volunteer. Like even what Russ said, when he got disrespected by the other inmate, there was that other inmate that, he wound up having that rapport with eventually, because Russ got that respect with him. Eventually we'll say, hey, yo, I'll handle that. And you have to step up and say, no, you won't, because I'll write you up just like I'll write up the other inmate. And now you have the officers probably like, we like her, so you're leaving the room and you got to make sure, hey, listen, guys, I'm good. I want you to know I'm good. So don't do anything foolish. And I know Greg is shaking nodding his head. So, hey, Greg, you're muted. What's your thoughts on that?
The number of things that Connie said that I wanted to jump in and comment on just overwhelmed me. When she said, and here I am sitting in the chair and the inmate is vomiting on me. There's a lot to take in. Well, clearly because there's a lot of vomit coming at you. I mean, just the number of comments that Connie was making, it was beautiful. And this leads me to let people understand, and in a few minutes when I tell mine, which isn't nearly as graphic as hers, but with Russ's story, with Connie's story, with the stories Tony's told, and I've told to people, unless you've spent a week inside the walls, you will never understand what happens on a regular basis. Things like changing adult diapers, cleaning up after a poop casso, having people throw up on you and spit on you, and the triple cocktail, and the things you see while grown men are doing to themselves and to each other while you're doing rounds. You can't explain that to people on the outside. So it's difficult to explain that, and it's difficult for people if you've never worked in corrections, if you're sitting next to your spouse or loved one who's watching this video and they're looking at you like, what's going on? Try and explain it to them. You can't. But Connie, bravo, because I guarantee you that if that had happened and Russ was near you, that guy would have grown about 2 inches as his spine would have been stretched, as Russ would have lifted him by the head and removed him from the situation.
Now, why does everybody underestimate me and the kneecaps I can punch?
Because what are you, like 5'6", Tony?
5'5", I think. What do you got, Russ?
No, I was just, the thing about being in this business is it was really easy for me to visualize that happening, and I was like, oh yeah, I've seen things similar to that before. Fortunately, in this case, that was not directed in my direction, and I came out of this just fine. It is a situation, though. I've seen people like that they want to spit and vomit and cough and hack and try and bite sometimes, like people that are in Connie's position there who are actually there trying to help them. And I've had I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've had to step in and protect and stop, and sometimes it just becomes that fur ball and there's nothing you can do about it. You just, you end up losing all control, and you just have to try and get the situation back from that. And I've ended up wrestling and stuff like that. Fortunately, it wasn't directed at me, but I've got it on me nonetheless. So when Greg talks about, having a hard time understanding it because you're not in there living it day to day, well, we've all of us here have seen that. And, it's just, I think it's almost beyond our ability to be able to explain it, even to our family and friends.
Now, I want to add one more question to Connie before we go to Greg, but on a serious note, by the way, I know we're having fun, but you got to have some humor in this, guys. But Connie, if there was a chance that after that happened, there was retaliation, and next thing you know, the officers that were involved lose their job, how does that affect you?
I mean, certainly, you know, depending on the way that the facility handles it. I mean, I've not had any problems ever speaking up on behalf of officers who have actually been stepping up and trying to make sure that they kept us safe. And so even coming just, you know, yes, being a civilian is one thing, but when you are in administration, you know, your word is respected. And so I've definitely put myself out there for many officers that were really trying to do the right thing. You know, nurses out trying to do meds and folks trying to take their med cart, like, you know, all these things that just happen on the walkway where they've really stepped up to protect, you know, the civilian population. Like, I've definitely stepped up, and, you know, that's just part of the game, you know?
Yeah, because it would suck if the officers, you know, let's say they went to back you, but they went a little too far, and now you become the star witness against them. It just becomes just such an awkward situation where you have to compose yourself, and then hopefully you're able to tell others who like you so much that they feel they obligated to do that because that's how good you are, and you have to actually tell them, hey guys, this is not what needs to be done. Because again, even with Russ's story, when you have more so with the inmate population sometimes, but sometimes if you have a good rapport with the inmates, they only know a violent world. And when they feel that you're being disrespected, they feel obligated to help you. And it's not by the means that you would want them to help you. So sometimes you have to correct them and say, hey, I don't need your help because I know what your help is going to entail. That's going to kind of fall into what my story is when we get to it. But I want to hear Greg's story. I know Greg has an interesting story. Now, I haven't heard even a piece of his story yet, so I'm very interested. Greg, what do you got?
So I have two different stories, and I'm going to tell the first one, and this is from a sense of, we talked about being professional and reacting in a professional way. And then when I'm done, I'm going to take a pause, and then I'm going to tell my other story. And if after I've told my second story, it's not on the video, it's because Tony went back and edited it out, because it's much less family friendly than the first story, but it is absolutely hilarious in my opinion. So both are fairly short, but they both prove the point to us. So in the first story, I was working as a segregation officer, and I was the assistant to the disciplinary coordinator. So it was my job to help investigate disciplinary situations. Now, this actually involved an officer who did not react professionally, and we can all comment later on what he could have done or should have done. But what he does here, I hope you realize immediately, was completely unprofessional and should have been handled differently. So the review was of a camera, and the camera is above a cell, so you can see the officer as he walks by, and it's bars, and there's one offender inside a locked holding cell waiting to go somewhere. The camera angle, the officer walks by, he stops, looks into the cell, and has a brief conversation with the offender who's inside, and then reacts. So clearly, you can't see the spit, but the inmate has spit through the bars at the officer. Now, I will also point out that the race of the two individuals, the inmate and the officer, are different. And the inmate used a slang term for the race of the officer on the outside. So the officer looks at the inmate, and you can see him on camera go like this to the inmate and leaves, goes off camera. 43 seconds elapse. 43 seconds later, the officer comes back into view, this time with a key in his hand. He turns the key, opens the cell, and goes in and drags that inmate out of the cell violently and off camera, and then into another area where he cuffs him, and you see him put him in a chair, and then proceeds to write him up and do some other things. Here's the problem I have, and I'm sure you'll all agree. This was an absolute planned retribution. He waited 43 seconds. He left and came back 43 seconds later with the key. If an inmate is behind a locked door or in a cell and he says something to you or does something to you, You have every right to write him up or do so, or, you know, like Russ talked about, write that disciplinary report, but you have absolutely no grounds to go back and physically attack that offender if he's secured behind a door. I don't care what he called him. I've told the joke many times that in 15 years of corrections, I've been called everything but a good-looking white man in 15 years. They can call me all sorts of names. And this offender, who did use a racial slang towards the officer, said that and spit on him. But if you're a professional, you've got to be ready to be called names. You've got to be ready to have every insult in the book thrown at you and spit at you. But you have ways of handling that, but they never, if he is locked or secured, they never mean you get to go in and physically put hands on that guy if he's secured behind a door, ever. And that's my point, is as a professional, you cannot put hands on an offender if he is in a secured area.
Can we explore the first story before you go into the second one? Obviously, I know we all didn't miss it in this room here, because I know Russ has probably got something to comment. I'm sure Connie does. But he also put himself at risk because of his anger. Opening up the cell door, going in there, no backup, no nothing. Well, the inmate got the best of him, pulled him into the cell. So, I mean, that's just a foolish move on his end.
Yeah, the officer does end up, just to tell you, it was handled. He received 3 days suspension because of it, because he didn't handle himself well. But we did have a long conversation with him. We tried to talk to him. He, within about 6 months, did leave the occupation. He didn't quite make it. His frustration, his anger with those things got the best of him. And it's not for everybody. We know that. But we tried to work with him. We tried to help him through. But you cannot let your anger or frustration put you at risk and put the inmate or yourself in danger.
Yeah, Russ, I know you had a comment.
Yeah, you know, that's kind of a thing, you know, whenever I hear stories like that, you know, and, you know, someone's, you know, losing it and, you know, they've done something obviously wrong. They've placed themselves in jeopardy. Maybe they've placed their fellow officers in jeopardy, and not just physical jeopardy, but also, you know, career jeopardy, you know, because then what happens after that? Then you have the cover up, you know, or something like that. You know, it just breaks my heart. You really have to step forward, and you really have to, you know, take responsibility for what you've done. And then after you take responsibility for what you've done, you have to decide, you know, whether or not you're going to learn from it and move forward, or whether it's going to stagnate you and, you know what, screw this job, screw everything else. Because this job, it'll eat you up from the inside out if you let it, you know. So sometimes you just have to be, you know, you have to learn that lesson. You did something wrong. Don't make that mistake again. Move forward. You know, I'm a real big proponent of, you know, trying to give people, you know, a second or sometimes even a third chance on something, but they have to be learning. They have to be actively engaging. And, you know, some people are able to, you know, go through and some aren't.
Russ, I want to compliment on something that you said, and I want to make sure it doesn't get overlooked for the people that are watching this, because I think this will also help them get a better understanding of the higher level perspective. And maybe we can get Connie's thoughts on this before we hear Greg's second story. But when you do something foolish, you have to realize the people that you're going to bring into that world, who are fellow professionals, who are going to be probably asked to cover shit up. Officers that are going to see what you've done, or taking the inmate to medical and expecting medical to, you know, put some, you know, bullshit on the paperwork to cover up your action. So I think, if anything, before you go ahead and think about retaliating, think about the people that you're going to involve into this world who have a lot to lose. So sometimes you're going to have to take it in, because if you don't, now all of a sudden I get involved in an effort to help you, and then that choice makes me, I'll be the one. Here's the sad thing, though. Here's the sad thing. When there's a foolish action, and I know this is true, made by the one, if they can't get that one who really caused it all, they'll get everybody around them, because that's where you can see the lies. And now everybody winds up losing their job, whatever it is, but the one person that did the foolish action sometimes doesn't. Because I'll give you a story about, remember a friend of mine who, you know, thought it'd be okay just to let an officer into a unit without, you know, putting the officer in the logbook. Officer was doing something foolish and, just didn't put him in the logbook. They couldn't prove what the other officer was doing, but what they could prove was his boy wasn't putting him in the logbook. Guess who got in trouble? The one who was trying to protect his friend. I remember someone messaging me that story, and the person that messaged me that story was the friend. I got to have him on our show. But Connie, what's your thoughts on Greg's first story?
I was just thinking of, I recall a situation like that happen, and I think it's just really bad because in the situation that's similar, as you said, the actual officer actually, I believe he had gotten a write-up because it wasn't as bad as pulling the guy out. I think he had gone in and they had an exchange, but he did put others in jeopardy by doing that, by opening the door. He was behind a locked door. And so he was asking, like, as we reviewed the security camera, because it happened to be on the medical wing. And so nursing had gone down, assuming there was some sort of medical emergency, which is why the door was opened, which then pulled the nurse into the conversation. And really, it just began to spiral because then when I talked to the nurse is trying not to throw him under the bus, essentially. But she's like, I don't know why he went in there. Like, that was really the truth, although he had asked her to give a reason. So it's just, when these things start to happen, they do start to snowball when you start pulling people in, and they jeopardize themselves because now if you start writing a report, here's your falsification of documentation. And then it's questioning whether other things that you've written are false as well. Like, your integrity along the way now gets pulled into question. And it's not so simple as it was just this incident. It becomes the life of your career almost gets questioned.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you made, by the way. You could have a perfect career and someone does something foolish, and then you feel because you have that connection with that individual that you should go ahead and protect that individual, and you just wind up putting a tarnish on your whole career, a career that was just great up to that point. I appreciate that, Connie. That's something that people should obviously really listen to the interaction we're having after each story. Even though we may laugh and joke, guys, there's perspectives and insight that you should really be taking. But Greg, I'd love to hear your second story.
Okay, so this will be short, and if it makes it onto our Tier Talk show, then I'll be ecstatic. So we had an offender. He was a mental health consumer. This was in the prison system, who had repeated attempts to harm himself. So he was on constant observations. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means one of our officers has to have 24-hour-a-day contact with that offender. We can't look away. Someone fills a log for us out. We have to have constant observation on this offender 24 hours a day. And we did 4-hour shifts. So basically you'd spend 4 hours sitting, leaned over slightly, looking through a food trap or bean hole, whatever you call it across the country, staring through the bean trap at an offender who basically is wearing a paper gown. And this young man was, bless his heart, I don't know if it was drug-induced or if it was a mental health issue. He just kind of would sit there in a daze. So I spent 4 hours from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. looking through at the tray slot, and he did nothing. He literally sat on the edge of his bed and did nothing for 4 straight hours. And at 10 a.m., I switched with my coworker, a buddy of mine who went through class with me. We both were fairly young in the industry. My coworker turns, he sits in the chair next to me, and I said, "You got it," and I get up and go. So now it's his job to look at this offender for the next 4 hours, who I've been looking at and hasn't moved in 4 hours, just sit there. And immediately upon my coworker sitting down, this offender reaches down and starts going at it and beating on this thing like it owed him money. He was shaking his hand as fast as he could. He was choking that chicken. He was beating on that bishop as hard as he could, and he didn't stop for 2 straight hours. And my buddy had to stare through that food tray slot as a professional corrections officer and watch this transpire for 4 hours. And for the first 2, all that inmate did was shake his hand as hard as he could, and you know what he was grabbing and shaking it as hard as he could. And as a professional corrections officer, he could not look away. You can't pay somebody enough in this industry to have to do that. And that's the kind of stuff we have to do behind the walls.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Connie. Connie, hey, Connie, Connie, what's your thoughts on that story? Unmute yourself, Connie. Connie.
Oh my God. I mean, I would hate to have been that officer. That's all I can say. I mean, listen, I've had that awful experience. So when I first started working here in Connecticut, I was covering the Hartford jail. And so the warden was very big on doing tours, and he wanted the administrator to tour with him all the time. So it was me, him, and a couple of others that we tour, and he'd literally go up and down the tiers. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've never really been in like the guts of a facility. So for me, it was a good experience because I got to see something I never saw before, but I saw a lot of things. Exactly. And then it's like, we got a female on the tier. It was like all these different announcements that I'm hearing, and I'm like, wow, this is different.
Yes.
But it comes with, really it comes with the territory. Yes, first experience kind of sends you like, holy crap, what's happening? And then after a while, you're like, come on, really? But yeah, I would have hated to have been that officer who had to sit there for 4 hours and watch that.
Listen, I will tell you, there is one thing no corrections officer, especially a female, should ever say to an inmate. So this is what you shouldn't say. And when I say that, please do not repeat this, but this is what I learned, is that when an inmate is going to town on himself and you walk by and look in and see him doing that, do not say the following words. That's cute. Does it come in adult sizes?
Dude, and they love when you say that in front of other inmates, by the way. Sometimes there's a lot of, when they try to be disrespectful to the female officers handle it by embarrassing that inmate so bad where they'll never do that again. Also, a lot of the officers that work inside, a lot of male officers don't like when the females are disrespected like that. But most of the time, I've seen the females handle it. A lot of people don't understand, man. Females have a very important role in correctional facilities, whether working at a male facility or female facility, because they have the art of communication or just staring you down. It's not about like, I have to kick your ass, but man, I will fuck with you mentally. And they just are able to do that. Now, my two stories aren't as severe as yours. I've only, believe it or not, lost my professionalism twice in my 18 years, believe it or not. But not enough to the point where I regret, doing anything foolish. One was I was working a unit and I went to go open up, I'll keep mine short. I went to go open up a podium which had a lock on it. When I went to go open up the lock, when I grabbed onto the lock, I smelled something. I went like this with my hands to my face, and it was pure shit. I had pure shit on my hands, and the instant reaction I had was literally to throw that lock across the room, which I didn't, kept my cool. The inmate that had asked me to get something had felt so guilty about, asking me to get whatever it was. I think I needed to get keys to the supply closet. And, I was able to keep my calm, tell the inmate, just step back. It wasn't you, just step back. I know how to focus where my energy needs to be. But the reason why I wanted to touch on something that with Russ's story was I actually had a pretty good rapport with the population. And even as I grew in my career, believe it or not, I have a good rapport with the population and staff. Again, just by being fair and consistent, literally. I mean, I try my best to be, or give an explanation if I can't. And then they did approach, and they did their own investigation, and they found out who did it. And it was a quick offer. Like, well, and I told the inmate who I had a very good rapport with, you do that, I'm going to write you. No different than, it's water under the bridge now. I went to the doctor, it's done and good. Didn't think about it the next day. But, just the fact that the inmate felt obligated, I'm sure there could be some people that were like, yeah, that you did it, go do what you got to do. I wasn't going to have that on my watch, because that's not who I am. The other time was when I was working with men and I was supervising a mess hall. We had centralized feeding. So the inmates would have to come out and sit into a mess hall, but there's direct observation, but you don't walk amongst them. You sit in the back and, but you still see them, cameras and everything. Well, one of the kitchen workers was stealing chicken, and I saw it, and he was giving it to the other inmates. And I let him go maybe the first 2 times, but then, like, you know, as he still, I was like, you know what, I have to address this. Because what I was going to do was I was going to catch the first 2 times, wait for all the inmates to go, but then see that worker privately and say, hey, I just saw what you did, and then make a decision whether I want to fire them or not, or, you know, jail a little bit, you know. But the fact that he kept on doing it forced me to react at that moment. So I told the inmate privately, can you come to the cage? Comes to the cage. And I said, my man, listen, I see you taking the chicken. There's about maybe 4 or 5 pieces that you're taking that you're giving out to your homies. I'm asking you to stop, or else I'm going to write you up and you're going to lose your job. He turned around to me. Now, mind you, the gentleman that I was interacting with was a cop killer. He was a cop killer. Turned around and he said to me, you're only saying loud, you're only saying this to me because I am black. Loud. In the kitchen. It took everything in me not to go back and forth because there's already a spectacle. But then what happened was, right at that moment, I'm thinking, you know what, man? I'm not going to have to defend myself because hopefully the other inmates in this room, the officers I'm with, they know who I am. But I still wasn't right with what he said, you know? So when mess was done, I brought him into this private area, you know, didn't do anything foolish. And I had a discussion with him. I said, let me ask you a question. What was the need for that? I said, just what was your need to just say that in the middle of the mess hall? Because you know what you did. You knew you were stealing the chicken. I could have fired you immediately. I said, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. I'm still going to let you keep your job. You know, I'm not going to come at you, but you have to start thinking about what you just said for no apparent reason. But here's the funny thing. If he was trying to get this image that I only did that because of the color of his skin, well, you still have your job the next day. You know, you still, nothing happened to you. There was no charges. You know, I could have got you for stealing. And you want to hear something funny after that? This inmate had mad respect for me. You know, just right after that. Even though whatever it was, you know, I still kept my professionalism, but there was that thought where I wanted to challenge that thought. But you know what? It wasn't so much to prove him wrong. It was to prove me right. And that's where the problem is. If you're going to sit there, most of the time when people are unprofessional, it really is about proving themselves right. You don't have to do that. You have nothing to prove. Your integrity will stand all the time because of the context of your character and the history that Connie mentioned. Your history matters because when someone goes to say something foolish, they have to look at the complete context. So let your history speak for you. And that was that's my story. The fact that I felt the need to prove I was right for a moment, but I was able to pull back and then eventually, you know, just kind of build a bridge between me and the inmate. But I thought real quick before we come to an end is we can kind of share just some insight on, we did touch on management perspective to alleviate liability. I'm sure we could touch on that a little bit more, but maybe some tips on why it's so important to be professional. We have covered it, don't get me wrong. We covered it in between our stories, which I thought was great, but I maybe thought as final thoughts, there's some personal advice that we could share. So I thought maybe I'll go with same order. I'll go with Russ first. Russ, do you have any like personal tips to, you know, remain professional when everything around you isn't?
Yeah, you know, I think that if I was gonna, you know, try and attack this in a way to try and really make a difference in it, rather than talk, you know, just about, you know, tips and tricks to keep your cool or whatever, I'd really rather talk about leadership and the culture of a specific facility. You know, if you're going to go in there, and you can be leaders at any level, people, you know, you can be the ones to decide, you know, how you're going to run your units, how you're going to run the whole facility. And when you decide that you are going to instill a culture of responsibility, accountability, and professionalism, that's when you're going to not have to take this type of video into account so much. Because what starts to happen is you start to have an understanding among your peers and among your supervisors where you know that, hey, you know what? I'm not going to lie for you, and I'm sure as hell not going to let you lie for me. I'm going to take, you know, what I've done, and I'm going to take responsibility for it. And you know what? People can make mistakes. People can pay for those mistakes. People can learn from them and go on. So, you know, culture, leadership, responsibility, man. Instill that culture in your facility. Make it as professional and as accountable as you can, from the top down, administration, all the way to the lowest level officer. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, first off, you're great. That's great advice, because it does start from the top down. You know, if the top allows it, the down's going to keep on doing it. And the sad thing is that we at the top level have to show a zero tolerance. But I want people to realize, and again, I really do want to make sure people understand that, or this, is that what looks like the effort to protect the inmate is really an effort to protect the staff as well as the agency itself. And I want to break into something real quick, and it still relates to the topic. When there's an incident that happens, let's say an assault on staff, there's going to be a divide automatically where the union's going to look to see if policy failed, management's going to look to see if the person broke policy. Really, this should be the point where we're together. You know, we were working together, getting our stories straight, and really being there to defend our people. What we need to do as management is do whatever we can to eliminate the motivation of retaliation, which means we don't want to put people in positions where they're able to do it because they're blinded by emotion, which means we at the immediate front line, because it starts with the supervisor. At the immediate front line, we hold that professionalism and we do what we can to tell the employee, I got you. Don't do this. I got you. And separate them from the incident, and then ultimately do whatever you got to do with the inmate to get them out, and then go to a facility where, you know, the emotions aren't really that, they're not there because it didn't happen at that facility. If management fails to do that, and even though custody, like I'll give you an example of Russ's story. Let's say it went a little further. Let's say it was on camera and someone went ahead and pushed to go get charges on Russ. The argument what I would have, again, not to negate or minimize what Russ has done, but I would also say, well, what did management do? This guy just got spit in the face. Did we make any effort to remove this guy from this situation? Did we make any effort to say, hey, this guy's going to be pissed. He's going to be upset. So what do we got to do? Because you know what's going to happen? The lawsuit starts first with the individual. They're going to come at Russ. But then after they come at Russ, they're going to say, what did you do? Well, you didn't move him away from him. So then they come at management, the agency. So there's so many reasons why management has to get involved. But also, I want people to realize, and what you see as the effort to protect the inmate, I promise you, is really an effort to protect staff from themselves and ultimately the lawsuit. Hey, Connie, what's your final thoughts? Any personal tips? Like, how did you keep it together when the inmate vomited?
I mean, really, it was the thought process that, you know, for me, I knew that I was on stage. Regardless of what was happening, everyone was looking to see how was I going to respond. And it really matters that I wasn't going to be on stage losing my cool, right? I wasn't going to be on stage sort of giving up my power and ruining my reputation. You know, my reality was that this just happened and I could either overreact or try to maintain some level of calm. And so because I'm a firm believer of consistency, I really just said, you need to pull yourself together. Even if you wait till you get into your office to like lose it, like that's when you do it. You don't unravel right here. And that way I don't have, because I know that I would be setting the tone. So if I'm escalating, I know that my staff will escalate. I know that custody will escalate and we'd all be in there in one messy commotion. And I really just didn't want that to happen. So, I mean, I just feel ultimately leadership is a practice. And every day we learn how to be better leaders. Every day people that watch us, they're learning how to lead by the examples that we set. And so, you know, you take it step by step and event by event. And hopefully, you know, you will have your moments. And I think that's what people should know. Like, you are human. We're all human. And things will happen and you'll have your moments. But you do your best to really be consistent in the way that you address issues.
And I really do think I want to compliment something that you also said, Connie, is that you really, you have to know yourself when you come into this profession. And a lot of people think like, you know, we joked before about me being 5'5", and the funny thing is when people look at me and they say, man, how could you survive in a prison? It's like, because it's not about the physical. There's always going to be someone bigger and badder. It's about communication. It's also about having control of yourself. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There's really, inmates aren't going to brag about beating me up. They're not. Taking Russ out, maybe. But I'm not a macho. They're not going to, unless I have a big mouth and they just want to brag that, yo, remember that guy with the big mouth? I finally shut him up. You know, so the thing is, if you don't have control of yourself on all levels, which includes what would be a natural reaction for you, someone spits on you, someone vomits on you. If you don't have control of yourself, you need to know that. I mean, you have to know who you are before you enter this profession. And I don't care what anybody says. The uniform's not going to change you. The uniform is not going to change you. If there are certain things that, you know, you have that you wear, that you have with you when you wear that uniform, it comes out. It comes out.
I mean, I was actually just proud of myself that I didn't throw back up on the person, because that's actually disgusting, right? Like, there's that chain reaction that happens, and I was like, oh my God, how did I hold my stomach together? Because that was actually just nasty.
Well, you know what? That obviously that being another thing. Obviously, what you had on you, but you're not a serious note. The fact you're able to carry the professional, you know yourself very well. And I would like to say this: for those that don't feel the need to retaliate, for those that are able to remain professional, you know, amongst those times, bravo. I think that should also be something that's recognized if we had shift briefings or whatever it is. You know, we're always recognizing sometimes the physical, taking an inmate down or saving an inmate life. I think once in a while we should encourage or recognize the officers who did not retaliate, who did not feel like I just got spit on, but guess what? I remained professional and I didn't beat that inmate down. We should recognize stuff like that, because I think that would motivate more people to say, you know what? We don't need to take it to the next level, because there are going to be some people that, you know, are going to be talking shit. They're going to be like, yo, if an inmate did that to me, I would do that. So we have to balance that. You know, when you got people that are coming at you saying, hey, Greg, you know, that inmate would have spit on me, I would have did this and I would have did this and I would have did this. Well, we need to have someone else next to Greg that says, well, guess what? Greg's still going to have a job. And ultimately, Greg's going to win, because Greg wasn't thinking about the inmate. He was thinking about his kids at home. I believe he has 12 kids somewhere all over the country. I forget his story. Yeah. Oh, sorry. But all jokes aside, Greg's thinking about his family. And the selfish act here is to throw that all away, because you have to get that one punch back. Your family suffers, not the inmate. Your family suffers. Greg, what's your thoughts?
Well, if you said it once, you said it 4 or 5 times. You took exactly what I wanted to say. And you do that, Tony. You have so much knowledge in you. You say exactly what I'm going to say before I get a chance to say it. And my closing thoughts are, you've got to know yourself. So you have to challenge yourself to figure out what are your hot buttons. I learned my personal hot buttons when I got into being a counselor and administrator was if an offender ever called me a racist or a liar. Those were the 2 things that they could say to me that set me off like none other. And I had to really dig down and find out what was the cause of that. Was I truly a liar deep down and I was getting offended? Was I a racist? And I did some soul searching and figured out, no, I just really hurt my feelings because I had worked hard not to be those things. So my advice is this: find some coworkers, find some of your brothers and sisters on the line with you that you can trust, and ask them, what are the things that set me off? What are my hot buttons? And begin to talk about them and work with your teammates about them. Know yourself enough to know that if you get into a situation where if arguing with offenders sets you off and when tempers get hot, then you know that you've got to change your attitude. If you know that vomit and bodily fluids are set you off, then avoid those things. So learn what specific things set you off more than others. And if you can then learn to control those areas and challenge yourself in those ways, you become a more well-rounded officer. So we've got to find what works for us, because we're all different. We all have different strengths. Tony's good with his mouth. He's also good with the quick wit. I've always been a guy who diffuses things with 2 areas. I use respect and humor are the 2 things that I've always used. Russ has always used his 2 things, his left and his right. No, I'm kidding. Russ is also great with his mouth too. He's very good at diffusing situations. We all have our strengths, but challenge yourself and know what it is that sets you off and work to control those areas.
You know, before we close, I know we had a closing thoughts, but that was a great question. I want to pose that question back to Russ and Connie. For me, it's testing the integrity, you know, which could fall into exactly what you said. But I like to believe I'm a man of my word. And when I feel people test that, I have to take that as a challenge immediately. And sometimes I have to cut back. Because at that point, if you don't believe I'm a man of my, and I haven't established that with you, I don't really care. Because again, context of my character will prove it. You know what I mean? If you know me long enough, you know me long enough, you know I am a man of my word as best I can. But Russ, what are your flaws? What excites you? You got to unmute yourself though first, Russ.
The one thing that really tends to get me every time would be when an inmate challenges me with that thing about, you know, you're not going to do anything about it. That just, you know, completely, because you know what? Because one way or another, I'm going to do something about it. I usually try and, you know, do what I can, learning what I've learned over the years to try and make that thing the lowest possible level. But that would be the thing that would get me is, you know, when they're trying to tell me that, you know, I'm not going to do anything about it, because I was exactly that guy that always was going to do something about it. So, but
and
that's my cross to bear.
I obviously see that, you know, definitely. And I'll tell you something right now. You're definitely a man that does something about it. Hey, Connie, I'm actually very curious to hear yours. I mean, you seem to be very well balanced. So what's your flaw?
Mine, I think, is the integrity. I think when people start questioning my integrity, when they start just throwing stuff out there and like doubting, like, because I'm very big on not misrepresenting myself. Like, if I can't do something, I'll tell you I can't do it. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know. Like, I don't want to write a check that I can't cash. Like, that's just who I am. And so when people start, like, if the question starts coming, like, that just gets to me. And like, I usually I kind of shut down. I don't want to engage because I know that it's my hot button. Like, I remember I was working at like this nursing home on their short-term rehab. I will never forget it. It was such a short stint, but this, you know, the administrator at the time, I don't know, I must have been in my like early 20s or something. And the administrator at the time had asked me to cover. Someone was going on vacation. They wanted me to learn a new job and cover that person. They were going to compensate me for that position while I was covering until the person returned. And I was like, sure, no problem. I can learn it. I'll do it. So I learned the job. I was doing the job. Maybe it was like the second or third pay period in. I hadn't been compensated for what they said I was going to be. So I kind of went back and said, hey, I just wanted to touch base and blah, blah, blah. And I was professional because like, that's what I learned. That's what I grew knowing. And so they were like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, you don't know what I'm talking about. Like, it was just such a bad, right, exactly. You see Greg's face. And in the moment, like, it was almost like I was being dismissed. And in the moment, I felt myself getting upset. And I just said, thank you so much for this opportunity. This would be my last day. And I went and packed up my stuff and I left. Like, I for some reason, I know that much about myself that I know that I have to separate myself, because I feel like that's also the point of no return, because it is kind of disrespectful. And so how do you get back to trusting and to being in a space of respect where your integrity isn't being questioned? So that I know about myself. So I keep it moving if I have to.
And Connie, I know our latest conversations. I mean, you definitely are someone that, you know, hey, it's not about this opportunity. You love seizing new opportunities. So am I right?
Absolutely.
I do my closing then. That's a new opportunity.
No. No. You do your closing.
No, don't make me question your integrity.
No way. No way.
Yeah, hey, you know what? I'll give you a break today, Connie. I will. Russ, give me a closing, man.
All right. All of you Tier Talk fans out there, this is the end. But you know that Tier Talk is dedicated to the brave men and women of law enforcement and corrections. We want to see as many people as possible subscribe. So when you see this, hit that bell. You'll get notifications every chance. Be sure and leave a comment about this thing. We want to see what you have to say. We want you to engage, ask questions, make comments, and we're going to try and address some of those as they happen as soon as we release this. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
And
stay safe.
Hey.